Why would a woman of ancient Rome, surrounded by marble, gold, and perfumed gardens, willingly weave poison into her hair? The question feels paradoxical, even tragic. An image of elegance shadowed by danger. Yet in the heart of the Roman world, beauty often carried a hidden cost. To understand why Roman women wore substances that could slowly poison them, one must walk through the layers of Roman life, through their ideals of appearance, the chemistry of their cosmetics, and the silent toll exacted by the pursuit of refinement. In Rome, hair was never merely hair. It was a visible declaration of identity, class, and virtue. A matron's hairstyle spoke as loudly as her husband's lineage or her household's wealth. During the austere days of the Republic, women were expected to wear their hair in modest coils or simple buns pinned close to the head, a visual symbol of chastity and restraint. But with the arrival of empire, restraint gave way to spectacle. The court of Augustus, and later that of Nero and the Flavian emperors, saw women's coiffures rise like architectural marvels, towering arrangements of curls, loops, and plaits that demanded hours of labor each morning. The elaborate hairstyles were made possible by an army of enslaved attendants, known as ornatrices, women skilled in curling, braiding, perfuming, and dyeing. Their work was both intimate and perilous. They handled substances that shimmered with beauty but hid corrosive secrets, powders of white lead, dyes steeped in vinegar and rust, and oily concoctions laced with mercury or arsenic. When Roman women desired to lighten their hair, to imitate the sun-blonde locks of the northern barbarians admired in conquest, they reached for mixtures that could burn the scalp and poison the blood. The Roman fascination with blondness ran deep. After Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul and Germania, the exotic hair of northern captives became a coveted fashion. Wealthy Roman women purchased wigs woven from the hair of enslaved women taken from those regions. Others, wishing to avoid such dependence, sought chemical means of transformation. Recipes circulated among perfumers and in domestic handbooks. Soak the hair in a paste of ashes and goat fat. Apply a mixture of vinegar and crushed leeches. Or, most dangerously, use a wash containing lead or quicklime. The lead compounds made hair paler by forming insoluble salts that clung to the strands, but these same substances absorbed through the skin, entering the bloodstream. To the Romans, the whitened sheen of lead-based powders symbolized refinement. Whiteness of skin was linked to purity, wealth, and leisure, a sign that one did not labor under the sun. This aesthetic extended naturally to the hair, which was expected to gleam softly rather than glisten with sweat or oil. Pliny the Elder, writing in his encyclopedic Natural History, described numerous recipes for hair dyes and depilatories, many involving substances that modern chemistry classifies as toxic. He warned of some, though without fully grasping their danger, for the concept of systemic poisoning was beyond the medicine of his time. Lead acetate, known to the Romans as sugar of lead, was among the most popular ingredients. It had a sweet taste, a deceptive softness, and could be produced by soaking lead in vinegar. Women used it not only on their hair, but also on their faces, mixed into pastes that gave the complexion a smooth, ghostly pallor. The effect was prized for its delicacy, yet the symptoms of chronic exposure, fatigue, pallor, tremors, infertility, were often interpreted as signs of noble fragility rather than of illness. The poison, in a sense, became part of the aesthetic itself. In the narrow lanes of Pompeii and Ostia, perfumers' shops offered jars of fragrant oils and pigments imported from across the empire. Merchants from Egypt brought coal and malachite. Traders from the east carried cinnabar, a mercury sulfide of brilliant red. The luxury of foreign color fascinated Roman women, who applied these minerals to their lips, cheeks, and hair. But foreignness itself aroused suspicion among Roman moralists. Satirists like Juvenal and Seneca ridiculed women who bought their beauty from the ends of the earth, warning that such indulgence eroded traditional virtue. Cosmetics, they argued, were deceit, a disguise that threatened the moral clarity of Roman identity. Yet the desire for adornment persisted, sustained by a blend of fashion and ritual. Hair carried religious meaning. It was offered to the gods during rites of passage, cut in mourning, and adorned in celebration. Brides on their wedding day arranged their hair in 6 braids, tied with ribbons of wool, a pattern said to echo that of the Vestal Virgins. Even these sacred styles, however, could be scented with oils that contained toxic compounds. The boundary between the sacred and the hazardous blurred in the flickering light of Roman households. For the ornatrices, whose hands performed these transformations, exposure was constant. The curling irons they wielded, bronze rods heated in small charcoal braziers, released vapors from the oils and dyes. Many spent their lives inhaling the subtle fumes of lead, vinegar, and mercury without understanding why their health declined. Roman literature records the cries of impatient mistresses who scolded their enslaved hairdressers for trembling fingers, never suspecting that the tremor was the whisper of poison at work. Roman physicians and natural philosophers did attempt to classify these substances. Dioscorides, in his pharmacological text De Materia Medica, catalogued the properties of hundreds of minerals and plants. He noted that white lead could soften the skin, but also that it was harmful if used to excess. Galen, more analytical, proposed that beauty should serve health rather than vanity, recommending mild oils and natural pigments. But his warnings were philosophical more than practical. The demand for dramatic effect outweighed caution. To appear pale, perfumed, and ethereal was to belong to the upper world of Rome, a society that worshipped services as much as substance. The deeper reason Roman women tolerated such risk lies in the social texture of their world. Under the empire, visibility was power. A woman's appearance could enhance her family's prestige, influence political alliances, and mark her as part of the cultural elite. Statues of empresses, Livia, Agrippina, Julia Domna, set the fashion for an entire generation. Their portraits carved in marble immortalized curls, waves, and braids arranged with impossible precision. Ordinary women copied them as closely as they could, even if that meant applying corrosive mixtures to imitate the gloss of divine likeness. Beauty was both imitation and aspiration, a form of participation in the imperial image. When viewed through the modern lens of chemistry, the Roman toilette becomes a quiet tableau of self-poisoning. Lead absorbed through the scalp slowly accumulates in bones and organs, impairing the nervous system. Mercury from cinnabar vaporizes easily under heat, attacking the lungs and brain. Arsenic, used in some depilatories and skin lightening pastes, interferes with cellular metabolism. Yet these dangers unfolded invisibly over years or decades. A woman might fall ill in her 30s, her weakness attributed to fate or temperament. not to the daily rituals that bound her to beauty. Archaeological evidence deepens this understanding. Excavations in Pompeii and Herculaneum have yielded small glass and ceramic containers with residues of cosmetic substances. Modern chemical analysis has confirmed the presence of lead carbonate, mercury sulfide, and stibnite. Tiny combs of ivory and bronze pins survive beside them, along with the delicate wire frameworks once used to anchor elaborate hairstyles. These artifacts, preserved by volcanic ash, speak more clearly than any moralist could. The tools of adornment and the instruments of harm were one and the same. Not every Roman woman used poison knowingly, of course. Recipes varied widely, and many relied on harmless ingredients: olive oil, rosewater, myrrh, and plant-based dyes. Saffron produced a warm golden hue. Walnut hulls gave brown tones. Henna, imported from Egypt, added reddish shimmer. But the most intense or long-lasting effects came from mineral compounds, and prestige often demanded extremity. In a world that prized distinction, moderation could appear provincial. The connection between beauty and health was interpreted through the theory of humours. The balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Substances were categorized by their perceived qualities of heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. A preparation might be considered beneficial, not because it was safe in modern terms, but because it restored a symbolic equilibrium. A woman suffering from excess moisture in the scalp might be advised to apply a drying agent such as lead oxide. The humoral logic thus reinforced toxic practice under the guise of remedy. Even as the empire expanded and diversified, the language of moral critique persisted. Philosophers lamented that Roman women, once modest and domestic, now competed with the extravagance of Cleopatra. Satirists described hair dyed every shade from saffron to blue-black, faces masked in paste, and the air thick with perfume. They exaggerated, as satirists do, but their words reveal a society aware of its contradictions, one that prized virtue yet pursued luxury, that condemned artifice while selling it in every market. At the same time, cosmetic knowledge circulated freely among both genders. Roman men tinted their hair and beards, whitened their skin, and anointed themselves with costly oils. Emperors such as Nero and Otho were rumored to keep entire chambers devoted to beautification. The difference lay in expectation. Men's adornment was indulgent but optional. Women's was a duty, a form of social compliance. To appear plain was to risk being judged negligent or unfeminine. Thus, the poisonous dyes became not personal eccentricity, but social armor. Across centuries, the aesthetic persisted. In Renaissance Europe, recipes copied from Roman texts reappeared, still recommending white lead for complexion and vinegar rinses for the hair. The continuity of danger is almost poetic. An empire long fallen continued to whisper its secrets through apothecaries' shelves. Only in the 18th and 19th centuries did science fully expose the toxicity of lead-based cosmetics. Yet by then, countless generations had repeated the same gestures before mirrors of bronze, glass, and silver. The image that remains is quietly haunting. A Roman matron seated before her mirror, her ornatrix standing close behind, combing strands that glimmer with faint metallic dust. Outside, the city hums with life. Fountains, markets, distant voices calling through marble courtyards. Within, a subtle alchemy unfolds, as beauty and decay share the same touch. The woman smiles faintly at her reflection, unaware that her elegance carries the shadow of poison. In the soft rhythm of her world, the line between adornment and affliction was never sharply drawn. It was as fluid and luminous as the oil she smoothed into her hair. In the still mornings of Rome, before the hum of the streets began, the first to stir in a wealthy household were the servants of adornment, the ornatrices, enslaved women trained in the delicate arts of beauty, moved through corridors still shadowed with the last cool air of night. They carried small trays of bronze pins, combs, and tiny glass jars sealed with wax. Their hands were practiced to silence, for their mistress might still be drowsing. When she rose, the ritual began, a slow, intricate sequence of washing, oiling, curling, and binding that could last for hours. The tools of the ornatrix were both instruments of beauty and implements of risk. She heated her curling tongs in a charcoal brazier, testing the temperature with a wisp of wool. She mixed oils with powders, some fragrant, others acrid, until they formed a paste of the proper texture. She had learned by experience which preparations stung the eyes, which caused blisters, which smelled clean or rank after a day beneath the Roman sun. Though her skill could make or mar her mistress's social standing, her own body bore the invisible wages of labor: cracked skin, trembling fingers, and the faint metallic ache of inhaled fumes. The Roman elite relied upon such labor to sustain the illusion of effortless grace. A senator's wife, presented at a banquet or procession, appeared untouched by the toil that had gone into her preparation. Behind that appearance stood the quiet endurance of those who served her. Literature rarely names them, but in the shadows of frescoes and the inventories of estates, they appear. One ornatrix, listed alongside linens and jewelry, valued not for her humanity, but for her usefulness in the delicate arrangement of another's image. Their work demanded knowledge. A skilled ornatrix could identify ingredients by scent alone. She knew the difference between the soft gleam of oil of almonds and the sharper sheen of oil pressed from olives. She could judge whether a jar of white powder contained harmless chalk or the more potent lead carbonate. Pliny the Elder described these substances in matter-of-fact language, but for the women who handled them, the knowledge was tactile, practical, and immediate. They lived among vapors and powders that slowly ate at their health. The hierarchy of the Roman household was mirrored in the hierarchy of beauty. Matrons of ancient families preferred restrained elegance, modest coils, narrow braids, while younger or wealthier women followed the extravagant fashions of the imperial court. The higher the style, the greater the labor, and the greater the risk. Complex arrangements required stiffening agents, mixtures of resin, gum arabic, and sometimes lead-based powders to hold shape against humidity. Even the ornaments used, gilded pins, ivory combs, delicate filigree chains, absorbed traces of these preparations, leaving behind a faint residue that would later blacken with age. Roman medical writers attempted to rationalize these customs. Celsus, in his treatise De Medicina, discussed the treatment of hair loss and discoloration with a mixture of curiosity and pragmatism. He recommended applications of vinegar, wine, and ashes, ingredients that could cleanse and irritate in equal measure. He mentioned lead briefly, acknowledging its cosmetic use without condemning it. Galen, more cautious, observed that women's cosmetics should aim to assist nature rather than disguise it, but his advice reached few outside the learned circles of physicians. In the homes of the wealthy, tradition and imitation outweighed medical restraint. The daily toilet, known as the ornatus, became a kind of theatre. Mirrors of polished bronze reflected not only faces, but hierarchies. A matron seated before her mirror was both spectator and spectacle, directing the gestures of her attendants as though orchestrating a sacred rite. When the style was complete, curls perfumed with nard or myrrh, hair bound in narrow fillets of wool or silk, the room filled with the subtle blend of oil and metal. The scent lingered on fabrics and skin long after the mirrors were put away. It was common for Roman poets to mock these rituals. Juvenal, in one of his satires, described the hours spent at the mirror, the complaints of women dissatisfied with their hairdressers, the endless search for novelty. Beneath his scorn lay an anxiety about control, the fear that artifice concealed deception. To dye one's hair, in his view, was to betray nature and to blur the boundary between the Roman matron and the courtesan. Yet this moralizing tone coexisted with fascination. The same authors who condemned vanity could not resist describing it in detail. Even within Roman religion, hair carried symbolic meaning. It was offered to the gods as a token of purity or renewal. During the festival of the Floralia, garlands of flowers intertwined with locks of hair were cast into streams to ensure fertility. In times of mourning, women cut their hair short or left it unadorned, a visible sign of sorrow. The same hair that could invite desire could also express devotion or grief. When perfumed oils were poured onto the scalp, they sometimes included ingredients used in religious rituals: myrrh, cinnamon, or resinous gum from Arabia, blurring the line between beauty and piety. The dangers of these preparations were not unknown, but they were misunderstood. Romans believed in local rather than systemic effects. A substance that burned the skin was dangerous. One that caused no immediate pain seemed harmless. Thus, lead, smooth to the touch and sweet to taste, escaped suspicion. In an age without microscopes or chemical theory, the gradual symptoms of poisoning appeared mysterious. Chronic fatigue, miscarriage, and trembling were attributed to divine displeasure or imbalance of humours. The connection between the mirror table and the sickbed went unnoticed. Trade fed these habits. Ships from Alexandria and Antioch carried perfumes, dyes, and minerals through the Mediterranean. Saffron from Syria, indigo from India, and cinnabar from Spain filled Roman markets. The more distant the origin, the greater the prestige. The empire's appetite for luxury was insatiable, and its beauty culture became an empire within itself, a network of merchants, perfumers, and artisans sustained by conquest and curiosity. When Pliny lamented that Roman women pay more for a single pound of saffron than a farmer earns in a season, he was less concerned with the waste of money than with the moral cost of indulgence. Beneath these moral debates lay a quieter story of endurance. The average Roman woman, even of modest means, engaged daily with substances that reflected her status and her surroundings. Olive oil scented with herbs might replace costly perfumes, while simple braids substituted for jeweled pins. Yet even in simpler homes, the aspiration toward the elite model persisted. Portrait busts found in provincial towns show carefully arranged curls and traces of pigment on hair and lips. The influence of Rome's fashion radiated outward through its provinces, spreading both elegance and its accompanying dangers. The archaeology of this world reveals intimate details that texts seldom record. In the ruins of Pompeii, excavators uncovered a small wooden chest containing combs, bone needles, and tiny amphorae for oils. The contents, analyzed centuries later, included residues of lead carbonate and iron oxide, the one toxic, the other harmless. These traces tell a story of choice and compromise, between natural color and artificial brightness, between safety and status. Each mixture carried its own silent gamble. As centuries passed, styles evolved, but the materials persisted. Under the Flavian emperors, hairstyles became even more elaborate, with tiers of curls rising high above the forehead, supported by pads of wool and stiffened with resins. The construction resembled architecture more than grooming. To maintain such height, women used adhesives mixed from plant gums and mineral powders. Some recipes recommended powdered sulfur to prevent decay, though the fumes were suffocating. The result was a dazzling fragility, a structure that could collapse under rain or crumble at a careless touch. Roman writers often compared these hairstyles to fortifications or trophies, mocking their excess. But they also recognized their power as social symbols. A woman's hair proclaimed her place in the world as surely as her husband's toga or her family's name. In portraits carved from marble or painted on wax tablets, hair was rendered with astonishing precision. Every curl an emblem of order, every strand an index of taste. To maintain that image required constant attention, and that attention came at a physiological cost that few understood. Lead, mercury, and arsenic were not confined to cosmetics. They pervaded Roman life. Lead lined aqueducts and pipes, sweetened wine, and glazed pottery. The cumulative exposure made the entire upper class vulnerable to its effects. Some modern historians speculate that chronic lead poisoning contributed to the decline of the Roman elite's health, reduced fertility, erratic behavior, and shortened lifespans. While such theories remain debated, the ubiquity of toxins in Roman daily life is undeniable. The hairdresser's jar and the senator's cup held the same hidden peril. Among the enslaved, knowledge of these materials could occasionally offer leverage. An experienced ornatrix was valuable precisely because she knew how to handle dangerous compounds safely, or at least more safely than others. Some purchased their freedom through years of service, using their earnings to buy liberty. Yet even freedom did not erase the physical toll of their work. The tremors, fatigue, and shortened breath often remained, lingering like the faint shimmer of powder on the air long after the mirrors were dark. In this interplay of labor, luxury, and ignorance, the Roman pursuit of beauty reveals its paradox. What was meant to enhance life quietly diminished it. The shining curls admired in marble reliefs concealed the chemistry of decay. And still, the ritual continued, morning after morning, mirror after mirror, because to abandon it would mean stepping outside the rhythm of Roman civilization itself. In the empire that built roads, aqueducts, and monuments, even vanity became an act of construction, layer upon layer, built from substances that would one day crumble back to dust. In the shaded portico of a physician's domus near the Tiber, a young apprentice held a mortar steady as his master, ground-dried rose petals with fragments of myrrh. The pestil's rhythm echoed like the pulse of the city, patient, persistent, old. Roman medicine was a confluence of faith and philosophy, a bridge between the temple and the apothecary. Here, the face was not merely adorned, but interpreted. Its pallor or flush spoke of humors, its wrinkles of imbalance, its odor of decay within. Galen of Pergamon, whose words still travelled through the libraries of the empire, had written that beauty was the visible harmony of the body's parts, a sign of inner proportion. To alter that balance with artifice, paint, dye, or perfume, was to court deception, to disrupt the equilibrium the gods had ordained. Yet even he, pragmatic and endlessly curious, recorded ointments and preparations for the skin: almond oil to soften dryness, lead carbonate for the pale sheen aristocrats prized, vinegar and honey for blemishes. He scolded and prescribed in equal measure, aware that no amount of moralizing could silence the marketplace of vanity. The Romans did not separate medicine from morality, nor health from hierarchy. The pale woman of the upper class was thought chaste and leisured, her skin untouched by the sun's labour. The ruddy complexions of slaves and soldiers spoke of exertion, of low birth. Thus did pigment become a marker of virtue as much as of status. In every jar of white lead was the promise of purity, even as it poisoned the blood. A noble woman's pallor might bring praise at the feast, and pain in her veins the next morning. By contrast, the philosopher Seneca derided these pursuits with sharp disgust. "She paints," he wrote of the Roman matron, "not her face, but her shame." In his vision of virtue, the natural body was sufficient. Its scars, honourable, its aging a triumph of endurance. But his words, like the dictates of Stoicism itself, rarely penetrated the private boudoir where mirrors glinted and perfumes burned. Even his own contemporaries knew that philosophy was for speech, adornment for life. In the baths of Caracalla, where the marble floors steamed and echoed with laughter, the body became both public and private theatre. Men rubbed their limbs with pumice stones. Women oiled their hair with saffron. Youths compared the sheen of their skin. The physician, the philosopher, and the perfumer all met in this place, each claiming a different truth about the flesh. One saw disease, one saw delusion, and one profit. The trade in beauty was vast. Merchants arrived from Egypt with unguents sealed in alabaster. From Hispania came red ochre. From Germania, goose fat for creams. From the East, silks and scent. The Roman world was an empire of textures and smells, the odorous signature of its wealth. Even Pliny the Elder, who catalogued the world's wonders with scientific fervour, could not resist recording hundreds of cosmetic recipes, though he did so with a sigh. "Such things," he lamented, "are the follies of women, and yet of the age itself." Within the dim light of a taberna near the Forum, an old perfumer stirred his wares in amphorae labelled with foreign names: nardinum, cinnamomum, crocum. The air was heavy with sweetness, almost narcotic. He had never seen the lands from which his ingredients came, but through scent he traversed the empire. The nobles who bought from him would dab a single drop on their wrists and believe they had touched Arabia. There was, in these practices, a strange duality. The Roman could condemn and indulge in the same breath. Even the Vestal virgins, bound by vows of purity, were permitted to use certain oils and washes. They were, after all, living symbols of Rome's sanctity, and sanctity required presentation. The empire was built on appearances, of peace, of piety, of permanence, and in that every face powdered with cerussa was but a reflection of the state itself, proud, pale, and decaying beneath its surface. In the libraries of Alexandria, before they burned, there had once been scrolls comparing the arts of the body to the crafts of the soul. To purify the skin was to imitate the philosopher's purification of thought. to balance the humours, the moralist's balancing of passions. Even the physician's hands, grinding and mixing, mirrored the work of the sculptor. Beauty was always a kind of striving, a reshaping of matter into something that might approach the ideal. The danger lay in believing the transformation complete. And yet, for all their moral reservations, the Romans understood intimately the pleasure of touch, the texture of ointments, the cool glide of oil on skin, the scent that lingered in the folds of linen. These were not vanities to them, but affirmations of life for a people who believed that decay began the moment one ceased to act. The act of adornment itself became a defiance against mortality. Every jar of rouge, every comb of bone, every hand mirror of polished silver whispered the same quiet creed, that beauty, however fragile, was worth preserving against the dark. Thus the physician's apprentice, grinding rose and myrrh, was performing a ritual as ancient as faith itself. He could not know that centuries later, the same petals and oils would be rediscovered, renamed, and sold again. That the logic of beauty, like the scent of perfume, does not vanish, but lingers, diffusing slowly across time. At dusk, the Subura's narrow streets filled with the murmur of daily commerce, fading into the scent of oil lamps and smoke. Between the taverns and laundry stalls, the beauty of Rome revealed another face, that of labor, endurance, and the unacknowledged. Here, perfumes mixed not with the sweetness of myrrh, but the acrid tang of urine, collected in earthen jars outside the fuller's workshops. The same city that powdered itself with imported lead also scrubbed its tunics with the effluvia of its poor. Urine, that humble yet essential fluid, was taxed under Emperor Vespasian, whose pragmatism outlived ridicule. "Money has no smell," he declared, holding the coin to his son Titus's nose. The people laughed, but the policy endured. From the streets, slaves gathered full amphorae of the city's waste, carrying them to the Fulonicae, where garments were cleaned in open vats. There, men and women, often enslaved or freed of debt, stood knee-deep in the sour liquid, stomping rhythmically upon wool, linen, and toga cloth. Their song was not of beauty, yet their labor sustained it. Within those vats, chemistry and commerce intertwined. Ammonia lifted stains and whitened fibers, restoring the glow of garments worn by senators and matrons. The fuller's art was alchemy of the ordinary, transforming what was cast aside into cleanliness. When the garments emerged, rinsed and pressed with chalk, they seemed new, unsullied, their purity the fruit of impurity. The irony did not escape the poets, who mocked the patricians for wearing the whiteness of plebeian toil. For the Roman, cleanliness was not merely hygiene, it was moral evidence. A soiled toga could stain one's reputation as easily as a lie. The toga candida, the bright garment of those seeking public office, was whitened with chalk until it gleamed. Its radiance signified honesty, though all knew the illusion it concealed. The candidate who stood before the crowd, his robe dazzling under the sun, wore not purity, but its performance. In this, the toga was Rome itself, immaculate in form, compromised in substance. And yet, the fuller's vats and the matron's mirror belonged to the same continuum. Both transformed the seen world through unseen hands. The laundress and the hairdresser, the physician and the perfumer, all practiced crafts that blurred labor with art. Beneath Rome's grandeur hummed a rhythm of grinding, stirring, boiling, of making the transient endure. At night, when the workshops closed and the lamps flickered across the forum, the city exhaled. The day's residue, ash, oil, perfume, dust, clung to its stones. The temples stood luminous and impassive, their columns streaked with soot and bird droppings. Yet no one saw the grime. Rome, ever conscious of appearances, looked upon itself as the gods might, glorious from afar, complex within. In the quiet of the domus, the matron removed her ornaments. Her ornatresses helped her unwind the braids, wash the pigments from her cheeks, and rub the oil from her arms. The mirror reflected not youth or decay, but fatigue, that ancient shadow of luxury. The cosmetics laid neatly on the table seemed to rest as well. Small jars of white powder, coal, and crushed carmine. They would wait for dawn to begin again the slow restoration of the ideal. Outside, in a cramped insula not far away, a laundress scrubbed her own tunic with cold water. No fuller's vat, no chalk. She smelled faintly of ammonia and smoke. Her hands cracked from lye. She knew beauty not as leisure, but as endurance. The daily attempt to remain visible, intact, against the wear of time and labor. Her reflection, caught briefly in the metal basin, was blurred but human, as real as the Empress's own. In this way, Rome's ideals of purity and adornment folded back upon themselves. The patrician and the plebeian, the philosopher and the perfumer, were bound by the same pursuit, the wish to cleanse, to renew, to preserve the fragile promise that the body, or the city, could remain untouched by decay. Even the temples participated in this endless washing. Priests scrubbed marble altars with salt water, burned incense to mask the stench of sacrifice, and polished bronze statues of the gods until they shone like living beings. Beauty, whether divine or mortal, demanded maintenance. Beneath the incense and the rhetoric, Rome was a civilization of constant restoration. So the day turned once more toward dawn, the streets damp with dew and the scent of lye and lilies. In the markets, vendors would soon call out their wares again: powders, oils, cloths, mirrors. The cycle resumed, tireless, ancient. Rome awoke not only to its empire, but to its reflection, that shimmering surface between artifice and truth. When the first light of morning touched the tiled roofs, physicians and philosophers began their daily routines, moving through Rome with the calm confidence of those who claimed to interpret nature itself. In a society where the boundaries between medicine, superstition, and philosophy often blurred, the question of beauty was never trivial. To the Roman mind, the surface of the skin reflected the state of the soul and the balance of the body's humors. Pale cheeks suggested purity or fragility. Flushed skin hinted at vitality or at fever. Every tint and blemish carried a message. Pliny the Elder, in his vast compendium of natural history, took an almost obsessive interest in the substances people applied to their skin and hair. To him, the beauty potions of women were not harmless adornments, but evidence of nature's strange generosity and its dangers. He catalogued recipes drawn from every corner of the empire: powders of calcined lead, unguents of goose fat and saffron, ointments made from crushed pearls and vinegar. Some he praised for their effects, others he condemned for their peril. Yet even as he warned of poison, he marveled at its refinement. Lead, he noted, softened the skin with a whiteness that no mortal could otherwise achieve. To him, the contradiction was intrinsic to Rome's splendor, a civilization that could make art of its own undoing. Elsewhere, Galen, physician to emperors, examined the human body with a more systematic eye. He believed that beauty was the visible harmony of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each person, he wrote, was a composition of warmth and cold, moisture and dryness, whose balance determined not only health but appearance. The skin, that most public organ, revealed the secret workings of the inner self. Cosmetics, in Galen's view, interfered with that natural display. Yet he did not dismiss them entirely. Instead, he proposed that true beauty came from moderation, a guiding principle as medical as it was moral. For Roman women, this moderation was difficult to achieve. Fashion demanded extremes. Pale skin, once a sign of patrician leisure, became an expectation so rigid that women of even modest means sought the same pallor through any means available. They used white lead, cerussa, and chalk. They softened the mixture with vinegar or oil, then spread it across their faces until no trace of sun or toil remained. Pliny knew the cost. Lead whitened the flesh while poisoning the blood, dulling the senses, and thinning the hair. Over time, the very pursuit of radiance eroded the health it sought to display. Still, the practice persisted, as all traditions of beauty do, long after their perils were known. The empire's physicians wrote treatises on safer alternatives: barley flour mixed with honey, ground bean paste, or almond oil. But the wealthy continued to prefer substances that left the skin unnaturally smooth and luminous. The effect was unmistakable, and that, in Rome's visual culture, was everything. Poets and satirists joined the debate, turning their pens toward vanity with equal parts humour and disdain. Ovid, whose Medicamina Faciae Feminae stands as one of the earliest cosmetic manuals in Western literature, wrote with gentle irony about women's efforts to perfect their appearance. His recipes were benign: crushed lupine, honey, and myrrh. Yet his tone revealed a truth: that beauty was both artifice and devotion. Juvenal, harsher and unrelenting, mocked the painted faces of noblewomen, calling them deceitful masks. But even his satire acknowledged a fascination he could not fully dismiss. Rome, for all its moral posturing, was a city built on display. Beneath these literary voices ran a deeper current of anxiety. The cosmetics were not merely decoration, but transformation, a challenge to nature, and therefore to order. To alter one's appearance was, in some eyes, to blur the lines set by the gods. Philosophers like Seneca and moralists like Cato the Elder condemned excess as a symptom of decay, the visible expression of Rome's moral decline. They compared the simplicity of the early republic, when women wove their own cloth and bathed in olive oil, with the indulgence of the empire, where faces were gilded and hair perfumed with cinnamon from Arabia. Yet others viewed the same acts differently. In temples dedicated to Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, women left offerings of mirrors, combs, and small alabaster jars. To adorn oneself was, in their understanding, a form of piety, an acknowledgement of divine creation, not defiance of it. Beauty was seen as the body's participation in cosmic harmony. In this light, the use of cosmetics became a ritual of alignment, not vanity. The same pigments that philosophers condemned could, in another context, symbolize reverence. Across the centuries, this dialogue between purity and artifice wove through Roman thought like a subtle thread. Physicians warned, poets mocked, priests sanctified, and women persisted, their hair gleaming, their faces pale beneath the torchlight of evening banquets. Each stroke of coal, each dab of lead paste, carried with it both risk and meaning. The poison in the hair was not only chemical, but symbolic. The constant negotiation between control and surrender, between the body as given and the body as made. When Galen students prepared their tinctures, they spoke of balance between hot and cold, moist and dry. When the perfumers mixed their oils, they too sought balance between sweetness and musk, between fragrance and decay. And when women arranged their hair with needles tipped in deadly dye, they performed the same act in another register, balancing allure with danger, admiration with mortality. Such was Rome's strange consistency, that science, art, and death should share the same vocabulary. The word venenum, which we translate as poison, once carried both meanings. It could signify either a harmful toxin or a magical potion. To say that a woman wore poison in her hair was, in a Roman sense, to say she carried power. Her adornment was not passive, but charged with the same ambivalence as the empire itself, capable of healing or harm, depending on use and measure. Even Pliny, for all his warnings, could not resist the wonder of it. In his notes on cosmetics, he described the sheen of hair dyed with mineral pigments glinting like metal in the sun. There was admiration in his precision, a reluctant acknowledgement that beauty and danger were twins. Nature, he believed, hid her gifts within hazards: lead, mercury, antimony, all deadly in excess, yet magnificent in effect. The art of humanity lay in finding the threshold, in using poison not to destroy, but to adorn. So the Roman woman, seated before her mirror, lived within that philosophy without ever naming it. She was both patient and practitioner, both subject and author of her transformation. Her reflection was not deceit, but ritual, an act of daily authorship upon her own body, an assertion that control over one's surface might, in some small way, defy the chaos of existence. Far beyond the marble heart of Rome, the materials that fed its appetite for beauty moved along ancient routes that stitched together the known world. From the mines of Spain to the coast of Egypt, from the red deserts of Armenia to the trading ports of Arabia, the empire's desire for adornment drew upon the labor of countless unseen hands. Every pot of pigment on a Roman vanity table carried with it the memory of distance, of caravans and quarries, furnaces and ships, the geography of empire compressed into a single sheen of powder. Lead, the quiet culprit of Roman cosmetics, came most abundantly from the mines of Carthago Nova in the province of Hispania. There, under the Mediterranean sun, men and boys descended into tunnels carved through grey stone, extracting veins of galena with picks and fire. The process was brutal and slow. Ores were crushed and washed, the water carrying away lighter sediment until the heavy metal remained. In furnaces stoked by olive wood, the galena was roasted to release its silver, leaving behind a pale residue of lead oxide. That residue, when ground and mixed with vinegar, yielded the pigment called cerasa, the prized white powder that would later touch the faces of Roman women. To the miners, cerussa was a byproduct. To the perfumers and hairdressers of Rome, it was a treasure. The jars that held it were small and ornate, often made of glass tinted pale blue or green, sealed with wax. In them, one could almost see the entire arc of empire: extraction, refinement, transport, and display. Wealth in Rome was measured not only in coin, but in reach. The ability to summon the labor of distant lands into the intimacy of one's mirror. From Egypt came another gift, or peril, that colored Roman hair and eyes. Antimony, known as stibium, had long been used by Egyptian women to to outline their eyelids, a practice that traveled northward through trade and conquest. The Romans adopted it eagerly. Finely ground and mixed with oil, it became kohl, applied with a slender stick of glass or ivory. The deep black outline it produced gave the eyes a glistening, elongated form that poets described as both divine and dangerous. Physicians debated its safety. Pliny, ever cautious, noted that prolonged use could dull the sight. Yet its popularity never waned. Other minerals followed: red ochre from Pontus, yellow orpiment from the east, verdigris from copper vats. All became part of Rome's expanding palette. In the bustling stalls of the Subura, merchants sold small measures of these substances to artisans and perfumers, each touting the purity of their wares. The air of the market shimmered with color and scent. Ground cinnabar glowing like embers, powdered malachite gleaming green, spiced oils of myrrh and frankincense, filling the air with sweetness. From the Arabian Peninsula came frankincense and myrrh, harvested from resinous trees by men who cut and scraped the bark, letting the sap harden under the desert sun. These aromatics traveled in woven sacks across the Red Sea, through the ports of Berenice and Myos Hormuz, then by caravan across Egypt to the Nile, and finally by ship to Rome. There they were refined into unguents and perfumes, the liquid breath of luxury. Each drop burned briefly in the lamps of temples or lingered on the skin of a patrician at dinner, dissolving the memory of the labor that produced it. The supply chains of beauty mirrored those of power. The same routes that brought lead, cinnabar, and spices also carried ivory, silk, and slaves. Along them moved not just goods, but ideas: Egyptian recipes for ointments, Greek treatises on medicine, Parthian dyes for fabrics and hair. Rome absorbed them all, reshaping them into its own vocabulary of refinement. The ornatrices who prepared a matron's hair might not know the origins of her powders, yet in every gesture she enacted the invisible geography of the empire. Even the humble comb told this story. Some were carved from boxwood, grown in the Apennines, others from bone or tortoiseshell, brought from distant islands. The ivory ones, smoothed by hand and polished to a soft sheen, came from Africa. The smoothness of an ivory comb against a woman's scalp was the final link in a chain of violence and distance, the quietest echo of the hunt, the port, the market. Such objects, assembled in the dim light of Roman dressing rooms, embodied more than wealth. They were fragments of a global order that translated the rawness of the earth into the delicacy of adornment. Every jar, brush, and vial stood as a testament to the empire's capacity to transform nature into ornament. The paradox, of course, was that this transformation often carried within it the seeds of decay. The same lead that whitened the face poisoned the blood. The same perfumes that masked corruption were pressed from trees whose lifeblood had been cut away. To understand Roman beauty is to understand this tension between creation and consumption, between the natural and the altered, between vitality and its slow erasure. For Rome, the empire itself was a kind of body, fed by the labor of its provinces, adorned by their tribute, and quietly weakened by the very luxury it sustained. Ships arriving in Ostia carried amphorae stamped with the marks of their origins: Baetica, Cyrene, Alexandria. Dockworkers rolled them across planks slick with salt water, their shouts echoing beneath the cries of gulls. From there, the goods made their way up the Tiber to the warehouses of the Aventine, where perfumers and merchants waited. Inside, among jars of oil and spices, powders wrapped in parchment sat beside amphorae of wine. The scent of resin and vinegar filled the air, the aroma of a civilization preserving itself against time. When these substances reached the city's interior, they entered the realm of intimacy. A matron might hold a vial of perfume from Arabia and imagine herself linked to distant deserts. The glass would cool her fingertips. The scent would rise to her hair. The material journey of empire became a personal ritual of transformation. Through touch, Rome drew its farthest provinces into its private spaces. The body became a stage upon which the empire performed itself, scented, polished, perfected, and impermanent. Thus, the poison in Roman hair was not merely chemical, but imperial. It was the visible residue of an entire world in motion, of resources extracted, refined, and returned in altered form. The whiteness of the face, the shimmer of the eye, the fragrance of the wrist, all bore the faint trace of mountains mined and forests bled. Beauty, in this sense, was Rome's most exquisite form of conquest. The empire's geography distilled into appearance. The geography of Roman beauty extended not only outward, across the empire's vast terrain, but inward, into the rhythms of domestic life. Within the walls of a Roman domus, the act of adornment was a choreography that unfolded each morning in near silence. The household stirred before dawn, when oil